Hello and welcome to the Fanatics of Film. My name is Ben, and I am here on as a guest host on the Entertainment Hacker channel with my good friend John Paul Rye. Thanks so much for having me, my good sir. The Entertainment Hacker Studios there in Universal Studios, Hollywood. Thanks so much for having me on his awesome show. I've been good friends and a good fan of Entertainment Hacker for quite some time. And today we are talking about some of the... talking about our favorites, if we had to. If I have to. If we must. Simply if we must. If we have to agree to say one of these characters are our favorites. Who is our favorite? And it's a toss-up for me between several. I'd have to say Luke Skywalker, of course. Wait a second. So he's not a new character. Then I'd have to say Yoda. Not a new character, unfortunately. You mean the fake Yoda? That is. Or, and it's funny too, because you could literally sit there. You could sit there and say, "Well, I like this guy, I like this character in this movie, but I didn't like him in the next." And that actually goes hand in hand with pretty much all of them. For me personally, I was on board with pretty much everyone in The Force Awakens. And say what you want about it. Of course, it isn't the best. It's not Star Wars at its best, of course, but it is. It's still Star Wars, and it's something to what it is. But I could honestly say that I really loved all the characters from The Force Awakens, and at least not love them, but I was on board with them. I was a little bit interested. I was a little bit on board with everyone. Everybody I was kind of like a little bit interested in. So there's investment there. There's something that you're kind of that's pulling you in. Some of that was pulling you in. And, of course, most of which was Luke Skywalker and where we ended up with him. So, anyway, but without further ado, my favorite character, my absolute favorite character, if we have to limit it to just the new characters, I'd have to say is Captain Phasma. And it's actually, I'm sure that this is probably not a very popular opinion because, most people just say she was wasted. But if you had a chance to read any of the extracurricular canon material that was put out, of course, we all know that there was no plan. If they had gotten together and had some sort of plan, that I think that they could have executed everything much better. And Phasma's stories are pretty incredible. What she goes through. There's one huge thing, serious problem that they don't address, and it's like they tend to do that a lot with some of the stories that I particularly really cared about. They, for instance, when they tried to explain how you get into the Star Destroyer captures the Tantive 4, which is the very first time we see Star Wars, how they actually capture them, like why they're not in hyperspace, why are they actually following after them. And that was a story that was written by Pablo Hidalgo, and I actually bugged him forever about that, asking him to tell us what was going on there, and he wrote a story about it. But it didn't end up working out. So same situation here with Phasma. So she gets in a trash compactor. She's in the trash compactor because that's what Han Solo says. Is there a trash compactor in the very next scene? You don't see her after that, but she somehow gets out in the comics, in the Star Wars comics. There was a Phasma, a book that was written, and I can't remember who it was, but this book was kind of written into telling her story of how, but it doesn't tell her, just shows her that she busted out. It doesn't. Anyway, that was total bullshit. But anyway, my 2 cents on that was just wasn't as good as I thought it could have been. And she ends up on these other planets. But anyway, that's a whole other thing that I'm trying not to get too deep into. But my main thing here that I wanted to kind of get into was kind of her story and where she goes in this book. This is a great book by Delilah Dawson, one of the best ones in the actual canon if you get a chance or if you like it. I know that Mr. Pete out there, I know that you've read this, and because I've heard you talk about it before. It's actually a really good book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's like literally it's like a Mad Max movie in the Star Wars universe. She lives on a planet that is has seen apocalyptic resolution, or if you want to call it that, apocalyptic happenings. And essentially they've gone from bad to worse, and they are all, it's like this almost like a Game of Thrones type of thing, where they're just literally everybody is in just kind of living in there. It's very tribal. It's a tribal experience. And anyway, so she has to prove herself in many ways to be worthy of the tribe, to be this and that, to be part of something really cool, or just to be accepted into society, into her societal experiences. They end up, and there's a reason why she always wears her mask. She always wears the mask because this is something that is tribal. It's something that they, as tribes, have to wear, and it's something that is indicative of you. It illustrates your power over the other individuals, other people who you have to instill power into. So or any of that stuff. So it's very, very interesting, and they end up having to travel, having to get outside of their area, which is like, it's a very small area. It's like, only like a mile or two in their square mile, because if you go on to another tribe's, land, you risk getting killed. You are going to be killed by these other tribes. You're going to be slaughtered. And so, her whole life she's spent only in this small area of where her tribe lives and everything. And so she ends up, they end up like, having to get outside, because there's it's actually Hux's, General Hux, ends up, I think it's actually the father, I can't remember which Hux, but one of the Hux, I think it's actually the senior, the General Hux, ends up crash landing on her planet, and they end up helping them and having to get them to another place where they can survive and get them off the planet, etc. And in that whole process, you get to see the villainous deeds that Phasma does. She gets to be the villain that we missed out on, the villain that we didn't get a chance to really see in any of these films. But they end up finding an old factory, an old facility where there's droids being made and this and that. I think technology, introducing new technology and all that stuff. So that in and of itself is pretty darn interesting. But her as a character, you get to see all the ways that she reacts and how she just literally does not care for anybody else. She is the true villain. And the way that this book had actually led up to it made me think that she was going to be, that she was going to actually be someone to be reckoned with, someone to be messed with in these new movies. Like, because the way they lead her up to basically, she ends up killing Hux's father, General Hux, and they conspire to kill his father to gain power in the First Order. So that in and of itself is actually pretty amazing, and just villainous. It's something that we want to see coming from a villain. Anyway, she's a badass. She's the true badass that we all wanted to see. This is by far the best book of the Star Wars canon. Next to I'd say they're tied. Maybe the other one I'd have to say is the by James Luceno, Catalyst. This is a great book. It is a great book, and this one is by Jim Luceno, one of my favorite author of all time. And I've talked to other people who are like, yeah, I didn't like Rogue One at all. It's like, well, it's a sad thing, because they tend to say that you have to read the book to like the movies these days, and that's all they're trying to do. It's like, no, you like the book if you watch the movie. That's the way it should be if you're going to play that. So, but anyway, I was spoiled because the Jyn Erso story was amazing in that. So. And I was going to say that Jyn Erso, Galen Erso, was actually my favorite character of the Disney Star Wars movies. but because of that book. But we're focusing on sequel trilogy characters, and so since since we're doing that, last but not least, if Snoke is Plagueis, then I'd have to go with Snoke because I love Plagueis. Darth Plagueis is my favorite book of all time. These books and the extracurricular canon is extraordinary. So, what is your favorite Star Wars character of the sequel trilogy, of this new canon in just the sequel trilogy? I know it's difficult. It's a challenge. Back to you, John. Thanks for having me on.